Welcome back to our series on Plato's Republic. In this episode, we will be discussing Book 5, where Socrates transitions into a more in-depth discussion of the way in which justice brings about unity within the context of the city, within the context of the common good. And that becomes, once again, an analogy for how individual justice in the soul, plays a unifying role. And so the question at hand in Book 5 is, how does this unifying aspect of justice come about? What's really involved in that? So you get the broad structure or the broad concept that justice is about ordering or harmonizing the parts into a single whole or a single life. And in Book 5, with good reason, you get all the interlocutors, Adeimantus, jumping in saying, but Socrates, you've sort of cheated us. You didn't go into the details to explain exactly how is it that the many share everything in common so as to constitute a single life. And Socrates sort of tips his hat to Adeimantus, saying, that's very perceptive of you to recognize that, and that's true. I didn't go into the details. Part of the reason is because I, Socrates, right, this is what he says, very bottom of page 137. This is Stephanus number 450 D, between C and D. Socrates says, "It is not easy to explain, my happy fellow. It raises even more doubts than the topics we have discussed so far. One might, in fact, doubt whether what we proposed is possible. And even if one granted that it is entirely so, one might still have doubts about whether it would be for the best. That, then, is why I was somewhat hesitant to bring it up. I was afraid, my dear comrade, that our argument might seem to be no more than wishful thinking." So the idea that Socrates has for why he omitted this sort of much desired necessary part of the explanation about how the many constitute a unity, how they share everything in common. How is it that the many share everything in common so as to bring about a single life? Socrates says, hard question. And if I were to try to explain it, you would find it almost ridiculous. It would be really difficult to understand. And he then is going to go on, as we'll see, to fill in the details, and so you should sort of expect that the details are going to look ridiculous. Now, so this is there's something really savvy going on methodologically within Book 5, because I think what Socrates is trying to articulate is an external description of how the many unite in order to form a common whole or a common one. That is how the many share everything in common. The externalized image of that, which is the city, is going to look absolutely ridiculous. And it might turn out, he sort of even hints that it might not even be actually possible for this to come about in its perfection. In its entirety, or in its completeness, and so it might just be wishful thinking. So the description of a perfectly united society where the many, the masses, all do their own job and they all perfectly harmonize with each other, and such that they share everything in common, and which is what is needed for a single life, right? If you think about it in terms of individuals, the example we've used in the past was with spouses sharing everything in common such that they have a common single life that's what we think the sacrament of marriage ultimately is. The two becoming one, such that literally everything they have is not I have it and you also have it, but rather it's we have it together. So it's not like simply these are my kids, or no, these are my wife's kids. It's actually these are our kids. Sort of first and foremost, they don't belong to me, they don't belong to her, they belong to us. So there's this single life which we call a we or an us, which is what is like at the heart of that relationship. And it's really difficult to describe. How is it that two individuals, two or more individuals in the case of a state, come together to form a single whole? So it's sort of a tall order to demand of Socrates. Explain how that happens. But nonetheless, Plato, wrote Book 5 as an attempt to give an externalized articulation of what that might look like, and he then begins it without much surprise. Begins it by this little caveat of, this is going to look really weird. This is going to look really bizarre. Just as a lot of the parables about marriage, or the discussion of marriage throughout Scripture, seems really odd. What do you mean the two become one flesh? Like that's a kind of a complicated image to have in mind, that the two become one flesh. It's almost like an attempt to say they become one organism. And that's kind of what Socrates is trying to do here in the description that all of the members of society share everything in common. It's almost like there's a marriage that occurs between two people, and then what Socrates is apparently doing in Book 5 is he's saying, but then there's also a sense in which there's a type of marriage that occurs between all the citizens of a city, of a polis, that is such that they kind of wed themselves to each other, so that they share everything in common, analogous to the way that two spouses share everything in common. And then once again, that is all an image of the internal condition of man, which is that the different parts of the soul share everything in common as well. So the pleasures, the benefits, and the turmoils of the pleasure sort of carry over, and they affect the whole life of the individual human. Reason, the fruit of reason, is shared by all the other aspects of the human life. The passions become quasi-rational because of the fact that it's like bounded to or wedded up with reason. And reason becomes quasi-passionate because it's once again wedded to the passions, in the very fact that there's only a single human life, there's only one life. And so these different parts of the soul get wedded together such that they share, as Plato puts it at one point down the road in Book 5, they share all their pleasures and pains with each other. Just as when you hurt your finger, you don't just say, oh, the finger was hurt. You say that the whole human being was hurt. And it was this one part, which is sort of the source of the pain that is then shared by the whole, or the entirety of the person. And that's analogous to, like, if my wife is hurt or sharing in or having some pain, that's something that I myself share in virtue of me being united to her. Whenever she gains, I gain. Whenever she loses, I lose. That's only the case because there's a common union that's had, that carries over any of the benefits from the part to the whole. Okay, so this is why Socrates then goes into this discussion about women and children and the relationship of women and children, because they seem to, and within the culture, they seem to be things that are had by only some and not by others. But what Socrates is trying to do is he's trying to say, in fact, there's a way to think of the relationship of children to men and women, and the role of women in relation to men, which kind of opens up a new understanding of what it is to be one. So going back to what we said at the very beginning of our discussion of Plato's Republic, it's a book about the relationship of the one to the many and the many to the one. This is known as the sometimes as the problem of the one and the many, or the metaphysics of the one and the many. And this is a case where it's playing out in politics, because I think what Socrates is trying to do is he's trying to say, yeah, there seem to be differences, many differences, obviously, between men and women. But the differences aren't such as to give them different ends or different purposes, right? The purpose of a woman is the same as the purpose of a man in one sense, namely, they're all about, the ordering of the whole. It can happen in one way or another way. He talks about, men are naturally stronger, physically stronger than women on a whole. He does make the little caveat that it's not necessarily the case that every individual man is stronger than every individual woman, because that's obviously not the case. But there are situations, or you might say it's sort of a generic truth, that on a whole, just the masculine nature is a physically stronger nature than the feminine nature. But nevertheless, both have roles to play within kind of within society. Not just they need different roles, but rather what it is to be a ruler. This is why he allows for there to be women guardians or women rulers, because there's a within the role of ruling, of ordering, there's you might call it a need for power and force, and then there seems to be a need for receptivity, and it seems like both of those play a role in what it means to rule, and this plays itself out at all the different levels. So there's kind of this like complementarity, two ways of almost attempting the same thing, and that seems to be what the difference between the male and the female amounts to for Plato. It's a difference that doesn't amount to a difference in task, but there's the same task that can be done in different ways, right? And he thinks both of those are sort of complementary in order for the proper ordering of society. Okay, and so this is it's kind of the way that Plato's dialogues work is that they're not entirely linear, meaning that they kind of always circle back, and they repeat a lot of the same points and make references to a lot of the same questions that were asked earlier, and it's done in such a way that it looks like you might be saying the same thing, but because of slight nuances in the discussion, what was said in the past comes to make a different point because of how the discussion has been proceeding. Okay, and so before we get too far along into this, one of the things I think is just worth keeping in mind and worth kind of writing down in your memory for understanding of Plato's views on justice, and specifically the Republic as such, is that justice as articulated in the Republic is about doing one's own business, doing one's own role, also stated at certain points as not meddling with the work of another, that is not attempting to do what is not your job, not attempting to do what you are not, called to do or made to do. So just as the passions weren't made to make decisions about calculations, or in fact, they weren't really made to make decisions at all. Passions do play an important role in the life of the human being, such that you wouldn't be able to live a fulfilled human life without the passions. Likewise, you wouldn't be able to live a fulfilled human life without reason. Right? If you didn't have a passionate life, or if you didn't have a life of passions, your life would be really dull. You would be sort of robotic. You would actually not be an animal. Right? To be a good animal which is what humans are. There are certain types of animals, right? We're living biological organisms. So to live a fulfilled, happy life is going to require the operation of the passions. So you have to excel in that way, but you also have to excel in regards to being able to know how to direct the passions, which is what ultimately reason, deliberation is aimed at. And so there's these different aspects of your life that all need to get ordered together. And so justice is about the parts, those different aspects of your life, not meddling with and overpowering the others. And we've all intuitively experienced when certain parts of our soul, you could call it, or certain parts of the human psyche interfere with other parts. You tell yourself you're not going to do something. You tell yourself you are going to do something, and then something happens, kind of a different order or a different kind. Like you plan this out. Okay, I'm going to read this book this month, and then I'm going to read this book the next month. I'm going to wake up every morning at these times, and I'm going to do it. And you're getting excited because you think, wow, this is a really great way to live my life over the summer. And then all of a sudden, you're put in a situation, and you find yourself not thinking different thoughts. It's not like, oh, now I have a better plan, but rather you find yourself pulled away from that plan because of your desire to sleep or your desire to stay up late. Right? So you have something completely different, something other than a plan or a rational calculation that pulls you away from just that entire way of thinking about your life. And so these different aspects of your life kind of war against each other, and it causes like a fraction, Socrates puts it, which he thinks is actually the greatest evil. The worst thing that can happen to the human being is that they have this inner fraction with themselves, that they become fractured, and they can't control their emotions. They can't control their passions. That's the greatest evil, because once that happens, you now don't have control over the direction of your life. And so then it can go anywhere, right? You become then a slave to whatever can be most attractive to you. You don't have any control over it, right? It's kind of a scary thing. It's like, the dog that can be led anywhere because of the treat. You hold a treat in front of the dog, and you can kind of direct the dog to come wherever you want. The dog's not going to stop and ask questions like, should I do this? Does this seem like a really good thing to do? Right? It's sort of completely enamored in the fact that its life is largely led because of the passions, the enjoyment of eating tasty little bacon treats. But the human is not like a dog in that respect, in that we have an ability or a power to control whether or not to act according to the passions, and we have a control over whether or not we'll let the passions have a say in our life and in our activity. so that we can take action which will sort of minimize how much we take enjoyment in something. It doesn't happen overnight, right? If you find yourself really addicted to watching YouTube videos or really addicted to watching, TV shows, it's going to be really hard initially to just change that habit, but you can change it. It'll take a lot of time and a lot of effort. You can change it, but you first need to kind of recognize the situation you're in. Namely, I've lost control over my life, and I need to find a way to have it reordered. Right? You have to sort of recognize that there's this disorder in me. The problem isn't, only if I got rid of YouTube on my phone, or I got rid of this app on my phone, then everything will be perfect. That would be like saying the problem is external. The real problem, what Socrates is saying, is it's not external. All ethical problems have the root internally. It's you're the problem. The problem is within you, not within the fact that you have all these external things. Those external things might contribute and sort of feed off of and prey off of your own internal disorder. But it's the internal disorder which is the cause, or the root cause of your unhappiness. And so you have to reorder that inner condition, which is you have to make yourself just, or you have to become just, which is going to happen through, as we talked about in book 3 and 4, the need or the necessity for musical education, or education in general, which is the way of getting reordered, properly ordered, because you recognize that you've lost it, or you've never received it. Okay, so that's really, really worth keeping in mind. And I just want to read some of this here in book 5 to kind of propose, return back to the theme that I was talking about at the very beginning of this. So here is this is on page 151. This is 461A. Then, if any male who is younger or older than that engages in reproduction for the community, he will say that his offense is neither pious nor just. So that is, like, if someone who is not just, someone who is sort of not worthy of replicating his life, right? So there are certain lives that don't seem worthy of being replicated, which is like saying, I don't want to pass this on to my children. I don't want to pass this character defect on. That's like, you could talk about passing on your life, your character, your habits. That's sort of that's imaged in the notion of reproduction. So you could think of reproduction as like reproducing yourself, reproducing your life in another. Now, obviously, there's a physical aspect of reproduction, which is what Socrates is like explicitly talking about here. But that's all, I think, representative, or that represents, or it's sort of an icon of a different type of reproduction. To reproduce is to take this type of life that you're living, and to pass that life on, meaning you've received an education, both morally, theologically, psychologically, your character, your virtues, and you try to share those with others, both your children, but also just everyone in society. You're trying to pass this on to them. And there are certain characters, certain habits that should not be passed on to others, because it's not good for the order of the whole. And so this is, I think, why Socrates says some people don't have the right, or they shouldn't reproduce. It would be bad for them to engage in reproduction. Ultimately, because I think what he's trying to say is, if you think about what this is an image of, reproduction is an image of, is it's about passing on the life that you've been given. And if the life that you've been given is something that you've sort of ultimately destroyed or disordered, you don't want to pass that on. You want it to be reordered before you then pass it on. But I'll continue. For the child he fathers for the city, if it escapes discovery, will be begotten and born without the benefit of sacrifices. So basically this, if you can educate your children very poorly, or you can educate your friends very poorly. By educate, I mean just form them. Like you can have a formative effect on people. I don't mean like literally sit down in a classroom. I mean to form someone, to have an effect on how their character develops, is education. And he says this can happen in a bad way. And so what we're looking for that not to be the case. But the reason this comes about, he says at the end of that paragraph, is on the contrary, it will be born, that is it, the bad formation, the bad reproduction, will be born in darkness through a terrible act of lack of self-control. So he's sort of making reference to the people that can't resist. They don't have control over their desire for physical reproduction. So he says, like, what you get imaged here is people that can't control this, and so then they reproduce almost out of like this uncontrollable urge, is like a physical manifestation of the fact that they don't have control. And so whatever is born out of that, he thinks, is going to kind of image that. Now, I don't think he's maybe saying this quite literally. Maybe he is. But the point, going back to how he framed it at the very beginning of Book 5, is this is an image of, or an example of how you share everything in common. An external example of how you share everything in common. And I think, so what he's saying is the way you share things with others, one key way is through reproduction, two people coming together to share, to give rise to a new life. And he says, but you don't want the origin of that sharing to be just lack of self-control. And so if it is, whatever result, the fruit of that is going to be disordered. Just as like you don't want lack of self-control to be the origin of marriage, two people coming to want to be married. It's almost like, look, I can't control all my bodily urges, so we better get married. That's a really bad plan, because what that's basically doing is it's saying we're going to make marriage the fruit of our lack of control. And so in fact, it's going to be a type of new life, but it's going to be a bad life, according to Socrates, because it's going to be one that's ultimately rooted in a lack of control or no control. And so it's going to not be a new life rooted in virtue. It'll be a new life rooted in vice, because its origin is from this fact that the two people can't control their passions, and so they need to turn to something else. Rather, what would have to happen for the union, the marriage in this example, to be just, would be there needs to be this recognition that there is perfect control, and this desire to pass on that good character to their children or a future generation, or however you wanted to put it. And that's the way in which reproduction would be noble, would be just, as Socrates puts it here. Okay, so kind of I want to kind of make this short, so I'm going to try to wrap this up here. The last thing I want to talk about in Book 5, we'll have another episode that wraps up Book 5, but the last thing I want to talk about in the first half of this book is the discussion on page 152, 153. This is around 462a, where you ultimately get to this discussion of, okay, we've reached this point in the argument, as Socrates says, that brings us back to the original question that we asked, and this original observation that we saw, which was that the greatest good and the greatest evil of society is justice, namely the ordering of the parts. So the greatest evil is something that tears things apart internally, right? So it's sort of like an internal enemy. All evils are ultimately going to be rooted internally, according to Socrates. And the greatest good then is always going to have to be something that is thereby internal order, right? To say that this car, this book, this friend, this person, or whatever, to say that is good, it's always going to be good only if it serves or plays a role in the internal well-being of the individual. Or another sort of level of this would be if it serves as an internal good in like a community, right? So what's sort of paradoxical about this is, so like my wife is in one sense external to me, but once the two of us come to share a common life, right, through marriage, that is, we sort of renounce, I renounce my like sort of selfish claims on things to say like, oh, you do this for me and I'll do that for you. That's still sort of an individualistic way, which is still a way of thinking of our lives as separate from each other. I have my life and she has hers. Rather, once you come to recognize that there's a common life that we both share, she sort of interestingly becomes internal to my life. She's like quite literally a part of my life. And so now you get this recognition that whatever benefits her benefits me, not because of she's like a means to my end, but because she is my end now, right? Because it's now internalized. Like I sort of, her and I become one in a new reality, a new thing. And the way that Socrates puts this, I think, is actually pretty beautiful. Like 462b, he says, well, doesn't sharing pleasure and pain bind it together? So the many can be bound together by sharing pleasure and pain. This is, I think, worth reflecting on, the ways in which you feel united or bound, or not just feel, but you become united and bound. You become better friends. You become a better lover with your spouse by sharing pleasures and pains, which is ironic. How can pains be a way of uniting? It's because of what we just said, that you get this recognition that if you share pain, that is predicated on a unity, and it's a confirmation of a unity. So even a pain can be unifying, which is, I think, ultimately why putting into a theological example, the life of Christ is something that you're united to the more that you participate in his, or share in his death, in his pain. The more that you, as he puts it, take up the way of the cross and you share in that, the more you share in his life. And so the unity, or the sharing in the life of Christ, is something that comes about through the partaking of in his suffering, and that ultimately I think is the reason why he suffered, was so that even in pain we can, find that as an act of love, which is an act of unity. And the danger, the threat to this, as Socrates puts in the very next passage, the sentence just right below that, is, on the other hand, doesn't the privatization of these things dissolve the city? By dissolve, it means like break apart or split apart the city. So the privatization of these things, of pleasure and pain. Oh, this is my pleasure that I don't want to share with anyone, or this is my pain that I don't want to share with anyone because I don't want them to suffer. I don't want them to rejoice in this because I've earned this. Even if you might want to do it with good intentions, like I don't want other people to suffer. I don't want my friends to suffer knowing that I'm going through, this horrible event in my life, or this horrible, I'm struggling with this. I don't want to share that with them. That's actually a way of keeping you apart from that individual. And if you were to share that with the individual such that they could share in that with you, it would actually unite the two in a more intimate way. And so as he puts it, the privatization of these things, the pleasures and the pains, both physically, but I think also emotionally and spiritually and psychologically, those all become means of unifying or disunifying, and thereby they become means of being happy or unhappy, because remember, happiness is ultimately the unity of the many into a one, so that they share a life. And then the last thing, this is just almost too good not to reference. This is on the next page 153. This is at 462D. I just want to read this sort of slowly, because it's worth reflecting on this. I think this is just incredibly brilliant. I've already alluded to this idea earlier in this podcast, but I want you to just reflect on this, and we'll end with this, and I'll comment on it very briefly, but just hone into these words. Okay. Then isn't the city that is best governed the one in which the vast majority of people apply mine and not mine to the same things on the basis of the same principle? Glaucon responds, certainly. And here's what Socrates says. And isn't it the city whose condition is most like that of a single person? So the city is, like we've said many times, a single person. I mean, when one of us somehow hurts his finger, the entire partnership, the one that binds body and soul together into a single system under the ruling part within it, is aware of this, and all of it as a whole feels the pain in unison with the part that suffers. So when one part suffers, all suffer, right? This is quite beautiful. If you've ever read, I believe it's Saint Cyprian, it could be Cyril, I get them mixed up, but there's a series of letters on the unity of the church, and he makes this reference in one of these letters to this bishop, a fellow bishop, who's undergoing his great persecution. His diocese, I guess, is undergoing great persecution, and he talks about how every time that your flock is burnt, devoured by lions, beheaded, impaled by spears, I feel that. I feel that pain. I share in that. And he describes that it's as if you're dying my death for me. Your martyrdom is my death. And so he's describing the fact that because of Christ, there's only one life, and so there's only one pain that all the members of the flock feel. And I think this is what Socrates is saying. Now, not perhaps to that full extent, but I think the concept is there. Okay, he goes on. That is why we say that this person has a pain in his finger. So it's not just the finger that feels pain. That would be the privatization of pain, but rather it's the person that has pain in the finger. So it's not me that has joy when something, great happens in my life, but in relation to like my marriage, it's we don't have a word for this, unfortunately. We perhaps should, but it's the marriage as a whole. It's my wife and I together. It's the we that has a joy because of this thing that I experienced. So the joy or the pain is first and foremost experienced by the whole through the part. And so this is a really very important concept that Plato is trying to develop on how the whole is related to the part, and the part is related to the whole, such that each of the parts become one. Each of the parts share a single life because of the fact that they do have this relationship to the whole. So you can say there's one person, given that he has a hand and given that he has feet, when the hand feels pain, there's a sense in which you could say the person with feet feels pain because the person with feet is literally the same person as the person that has the hand that was in the fire or something. So there is it's almost to the point where what Socrates is saying is it's not so much a metaphor. There's something deeply metaphysical going on in the relationship of the one to the many. So much so that you really can talk about there being a single life that is had by all the parts, which is the primary subject of happiness and the primary subject of pleasure and pain in which the parts share. Quite beautiful kind of reflection on the way to end this. And then here's the way we'll wrap it up. The next thing Socrates says on that page, I imagine then that whether one of its citizens has an experience, whether good or bad, such a city will most certainly say that the experience is its own, and all of it together will share his pleasure or pain. That almost could have come right out of St. Paul. It's quite profound. So with that, we'll end, and we'll pick back up next time with wrapping up Book 5.